Next up, it should come as no surprise that Massachusetts residents are leaning heavily towards Joe Biden in the race for president. He's 18 points ahead of Donald Trump, according to a new GBH News CommonWealth Beacon poll conducted by the MassINC Polling Group. But there's another trend playing out in Massachusetts that could end up hurting Trump nationwide, and it is all about turnout. MassINC Polling Group President Steve Koczela joins me now with more. Steve, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be back.
So you found, among other things in this poll, that President Biden leads former President Trump among people who are very likely to vote. His margin is, he's got 91%. 91% of Biden supporters are very likely to vote, 80% of Trump supporters. Why is this significant?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you compare that to all registered voters, in other words, if you ask anybody who could potentially vote, the margin is much smaller. So basically what that means is that the Trump campaign, if they want to do better here in Massachusetts, and the trend extends across other states, it's not just determining his margin in Massachusetts, what they need to do is basically get those less likely voters out. That's a pretty unfamiliar challenge for Republicans. In other recent competitive presidential elections, it's usually been the Democrats who are hoping that those less likely voters will turn out. So that's why it's significant, because it illustrates kind of what's going on across the country.
I was surprised by that finding because it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong here, like there's a tension between it on the one hand and on the other hand, what we've been hearing for months, which is that Biden supporters are more animated by a need to vote against Trump than they are passionate support for Joe Biden, while Trump voters seem genuinely excited about their candidate. Is there a tension between these two things?
There is, and how that tension plays out will be a big part of how the election ends up. When you look at, for instance, what words Biden voters or Trump voters or voters overall use, Trump voters are less likely to use words like disappointed, annoyed.
Yeah, let's pull up those numbers because these are, so overall, 48% of people said they were disappointed by a Biden-Trump rematch. 31% said they were annoyed. 23% said they were angry, but it's better for, former President Trump, his voters are less likely to use those negative terms?
They are. They're less likely to use those negative terms and more likely to say that they're excited and interested and so forth. So the question, though, is Trump sort of has his base, but then it's the next slice of voters, the slice who typically on either side will show up and not necessarily be thrilled about the candidate, but will turn out anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's the group which is both less likely to turn out at all, and also is, in this case, the slice that Trump really needs. We saw it show up in the primaries. We've seen it show up in sort of other venues. He needs them to come out, and he needs them to vote for him.
You also asked people how they feel about political tensions in the United States right now and how they feel about the prospect of violence in connection with the election. 72% of people overall said that political tensions in America today are either very bad or constitute a crisis. 64%, I believe, said that they thought it was either somewhat likely or very likely that we were going to see major violence in connection with the election. Those are pretty bleak numbers, right?
Yes, very sobering numbers. And the expectation or the anticipation of the potential of violence isn't just confined to one group. It extends across demographics, parties, geographies. It's not just like only Biden supporters or only Trump supporters. It's a fairly universal, concern at this point that, 2024 could potentially end in violence.
Let's talk about some state-focused issues that you got into in the poll, and there were a whole bunch. The public seems to be conflicted when it comes to the MBTA Communities Act, which requires communities near the T to zone for expanded multifamily housing. That's a broad brush description, but I think it gets to the gist of it. The public is of two minds when it comes to this law, right? Like they can't quite figure out how they feel about it.
Yeah, first of all, there's a lot of people who say they just don't know. But among those who do express an opinion, more people both think the law is good. It's good policy, but then think that towns should be able to opt out, but then also think that the state should be able to levy financial penalties against them. There's some interesting demographic breakdowns, certainly by party. Democrats are more supportive of the act overall across all three questions. Renters, key, obviously a key group when thinking about this policy, also more likely to support the
That makes sense intuitively.
Sure.
Yeah. What about this proposal to give Diana DiZoglio and all state auditors henceforth the ability to audit the state legislature? She's been pushing to do this. She can't do it right now, so she's pushing a ballot question that will let her do it moving forward if it all works out for her. How do people feel about that?
And so far, people who do have an opinion are in favor of it. Just over half of people that we asked, just over half of voters say that they're in favor of the proposal to let the auditor audit the legislature. And relatively few actually say they're opposed to it, but there's a lot who say they don't know. And why that's key in a ballot question is if you're pushing a ballot question, you want to be much higher. You want to be in the 60s and 70s, basically, as far as your support. Because what you're expecting is that the people who say, I don't know, a lot of them, most, even close to all of them, are expected to say, you know what, I don't get what this thing's about.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep things the way they are, which is a no vote. And then some of the yes people also, the no campaign, if there is one, will try to grab a few of those people just enough and just drag them across the line to pull that under 50%.
That's really interesting and a bit of political knowledge that I lacked until you just shared it with me. Because when I saw these numbers, let me just refresh my memory as to what they are. 53% saying that they would vote in favor, 12% saying no, 35% unsure. I just assumed that Diana DiZoglio was going to be pumping her fist, but it sounds like...
And certainly, that's a big margin to start with, and the task that she and her supporters will have is be sure that those undecideds don't have enough doubt introduced in their minds to push them to a no. They have to keep enough of those 53%. But the no campaign by default starts second in a ballot question because you get some supporters together, you have an idea, you put forward this question, and it's not until there's a question that any no side could even potentially form. So their campaign will be starting later, and that's why you want to be starting higher because you're expecting to bleed support to a certain extent.
Yeah. Okay, that's fascinating. Thank you for that. You looked at sports betting and the prevalence of sports betting, and I want to just pull up the top line number. The percent of Massachusetts residents who have placed a bet on sports in the last year, according to your poll, it's 30% for people ages 18 to 29, 35% for people ages 30 to 44, 45 to 59-year-olds is 23%, and then it's lower for people over 60. Why are those findings significant? What else did you find about sports betting habits?
Yeah, it certainly does go down, in upper age groups. The groups that tend to do it the most, men do it more, relatively younger people. It's not the youngest age group, of course, because if you're under 21, of course, you can't do it in Massachusetts yet at this point. So that certainly was the case. And also closer to Boston, we found prevalence was a bit higher,
that's
sort of closer in as well.
And not something I necessarily would have anticipated.
I think it probably has to do with two things. One is demographics, of course, just the age of the population in Boston.
Yeah.
If young people are doing it more, then it will be more concentrated in Boston. Also sporting events, more likely to happen around here. So if you're, participating or viewing something or attending something and placing bets, sort of at the venue, that would be another reason that
makes
could
sense.
happen.
I know we're releasing results next week involving the migrant crisis and how people in the state feel about the way it's being handled. You can't share the results of the poll yet on that topic, but can you offer any sort of preview just to whet people's appetites?
Yes, definitely. So definitely check out the stories next week on that. But the question that we did ask that's out already is just what is the top issue on your mind that you think state leaders should be focusing on? And for years and years and years, it was very reliably education, the economy, and healthcare. And then housing in recent years has started to grow, and then COVID, took over everything for a little while. But this is the first time we've seen immigration and the migrant issue as the number one issue that people mention, unprompted. There's not a list.
The number one issue.
Yeah, the number one issue. So, how that translates into what they feel policy-wise, that's what we'll be releasing next week.
That's a huge finding. All right, Steve Koczela, thank you very much for talking all of this through. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.